70 years, mainland China and Taiwan have been separated, each dreaming of one day reuniting. However, each has a totally different idea of how to do so. This, unsurprisingly, has created tensions between the two, which has a very real risk of turning into an armed conflict. And as we all know, China has been rapidly building up its military, especially its navy and amphibious forces. They have already launched 2 new amphibious assault ships designed to deploy forces onto enemy territory, and still constructing more. So could China actually take Taiwan? And this episode's sponsor fits perfectly with this: World of Warships. Duke it out in one of over 300 warships from throughout the early 20th century, whether it's famous ones like the USS Iowa, or less known ships like the USS Samsung, and everything in between. This is one game I know I can honestly say I really enjoy, and everyone I talk to who plays it as well. The action is great, but the strategy element is what I really love. It's not just whoever has the biggest and baddest ship wins. Sometimes it's better to have speed and maneuverability than just big guns. They are always adding new elements to the game, such as aircraft carriers, complete with aircraft you can control, and now submarines. Also, there's always new missions and other additions. They are extremely involved in constantly making the game better and more fun. So go check them out and see for yourself. If you use the link down in the description, you'll get 700 doubloons, 1 million credits, 7 days of premium account, and 2 free premium ships as a new player to get you started. So give it a try, and doing so will really help support the channel as well. Thanks. Taiwan is extremely valuable from a strategic perspective to China. Having control of it will give it much better access into the rest of the Pacific Ocean, which as of right now is blocked by South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, which form a sort of wall, referred to as the First Island Chain. Chinese generals and government officials have written about the importance of Taiwan to China for decades, and also how they might reclaim it, by diplomatic and military means. In 2013, Taiwan's Defense Ministry released what they claim was China's plan to invade Taiwan by the year 2020. The plans are extremely detailed, including much attention to the weather conditions in the region, which suffers from typhoons, strong winds, and a high sea state, which could endanger any attempt at an amphibious landing. Most important to any planned attack is knowing your enemy and what defenses they can mount. Taiwan is a relatively powerful military, but it is much smaller than that of China's. With just under 24 million people compared to China's nearly 1.5 billion, that isn't much of a surprise. Taiwan spends a larger percentage of its GDP on defense, about 3%, but China, being a much larger economy, means their spending dwarfs that of Taiwan, over $200 billion compared to Taiwan's $13 billion a year for defense. But, unlike China, Taiwan can focus its attention on defending the island against pretty much a single threat: China. To start, Taiwan has built up its own impressive network of air defenses based around the Skybow family of surface-to-air missiles. The Skybow 1 and 2 mostly focus on defending against aircraft, and Skybow 3 against ballistic missiles. They also have several Patriot and many Hawk systems from the US. Along with this, you can add several thousand man-pads and other short-range systems, which could cause a major headache to any invading helicopters or low-flying aircraft. They also have a pretty impressive air force, complete with over 100 F-16s, 100 of their own domestically produced FCK-1s, 50 Mirage 2000s, and a decent number of airborne early warning and patrol aircraft to manage the battle space. To support these, they also have a good number of air bases, all of them complete with hardened aircraft shelters, and some even with underground hangars for protection from attack. They also have a decently large and capable navy, with some 25 destroyers and frigates, a couple dozen missile boats, and 4 submarines, all of which could inflict some serious damage on any invading naval fleet if they're not dealt with. And finally, their ground forces. The Army has some 1,000 tanks, though mostly are older, and a good supply of anti-tank, ground-launched anti-ship, and cruise missiles. And in total, they have some 170,000 active personnel, and 10 times more reservists that could be called upon. China, on the other hand, has really expanded its forces over the years, and continues to do so. Probably 1,000 ballistic missiles that could be used, along with hundreds of cruise missiles, over 1,000 aircraft, including the new 5th-gen stealthy J-20, a massive navy complete with aircraft carriers, and soon, large amphibious assault ships, not to mention massive numbers of tanks, troops, and the like. First, as China, you want to take out their air bases, radars, and command and control as fast as possible. You'd also have to deal with their air defenses, like the Skybows and Patriot systems. This could best be done with ballistic missiles. They are extremely fast, giving very little time to react. Actual missile flight time could be less than 10 minutes. Taiwan's limited number of SAMs able to shoot down ballistic missiles would struggle to defend them against hundreds of incoming warheads, due to the short amount of time and the inherent difficulty in intercepting ballistic missiles. As stated, these missile attacks would be aimed at destroying command and control, making it difficult for Taiwan to organize a defense, air bases to ground their air force, and air defenses to pave the way for their fighter and strike aircraft. Taiwan's navy is another element that has to be dealt with immediately. China is well equipped for this though, with the famous DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles, but also massive number of ship and air-launched missiles as well. Those 4 submarines would have to be found and sunk. Likely, only 1 or 2, maybe 3 will be deployed at any one given time, with the others either between deployments or undergoing maintenance. These submarines could lie in wait quietly in the Strait of Taiwan and cause trouble for any landing ships. However, the strait is very shallow, about 60 meters or 200 feet. This would make locating submarines easier and much more difficult for them to escape after an attack. After this, China would begin to work on ground targets in Taiwan, hitting bases, communications, vital infrastructure, and other defenses like land-based anti-ship missile sites with strike and bomber aircraft. As we've seen countless times throughout history, aerial bombardment can only do so much. You need troops on the ground. China already has a massive navy, and now seem to be focusing on their amphibious fleet. They already have 2 completed, and building a 3rd Type 75 ships. This, along with dozens of other, can quickly deploy large number of forces, equipment, and supplies to attack Taiwan. Hundreds of thousands of troops would need to be ferried across the strait. To assist in this task, they also have a large maritime militia, composed of fishing boats and other ships that could be used to transport forces to the island. The issue is where to land. Taiwan's geography really limits where China could land and form a beachhead. Some possibilities could include Guanyin in the north, Taichung in the middle, or around Tainan further south. There are also theories that China could stage an invasion and land on the east coast. This, however, would be very difficult, as they would need to transverse around Taiwan, and that region is extremely mountainous. Wherever you land, you need to be able to secure a sea route and constantly resupply your forces. It's just incredible how much supplies you need to sustain any force, let alone one well over 100,000. Basic things like ammunition and fuel, but also food, equipment, tents, makeshift shelters, medicine, support personnel and all their gear, replacement parts, and much, much more. After this, the ground war begins. If China is able to neutralize Taiwan's air force, air supremacy will be a major advantage for them. But this part can lag on for days, weeks, even months. Taiwan would be fighting for its very survival, and every man, woman, and child could potentially play a role in its defense. The key to any success will be speed. China would need to do all this and establish a beachhead not in a matter of days, but in a matter of hours. Then the ground war, as mentioned, will take much longer. Time would not be on China's side. Every minute, hour, day longer it takes gives Taiwan more time to prepare and mount a stronger defense. Any mobilization of forces to prepare for such an event would almost certainly be very noticeable. One way China might be able to strike quicker, without alerting everyone, will be to prepare under the guise of a military exercise. They can announce that they're going to hold a large military war game, which is something they do relatively regularly, and use it as a chance to build up their forces. They could also, hypothetically, create a manufactured crisis or dispute to start a war. There are many already existing territorial disputes in the region, and they could potentially use one of these as a springboard to begin an invasion. However it's done, speed is absolutely key. Speed also limits the time for allies to come to Taiwan's defense, the US being the most obvious one. Would the US defend Taiwan? This is an interesting question. The Taiwan Relations Act does not guarantee the US coming to their defense, and requires any decision to do so to be made by Congress, not just the President. This would almost certainly delay any help from the US. However, it's almost universally believed that the US would intervene. The issue here is that Taiwan is not exactly considered a country by the US under their One China policy, or by the UN. So there could be some serious considerations as to whether it's worth getting into a war with China over Taiwan. It's easy, in peacetime, to say and believe that you would come to the defense of another, but when the fighting actually breaks out, it suddenly becomes much more real, and makes the choice to intervene much more serious. Support by the US would likely come once the ground war began, and could consist of fighting Chinese aircraft over the island and airstrikes against troops on the ground, but not against air bases or other sites in mainland China, to try to avoid escalating the war into a much larger and possibly nuclear conflict. However, in the end, without massive, large-scale interventions by the US and others, China would almost certainly, ultimately, be successful. But at what cost? Any attack on Taiwan would have massive political ramifications for China, and they know this. It would undoubtedly turn many nations against China, and boycotts, sanctions, and UN resolutions could have some pretty serious economic consequences, and leave China in a worse position even if they win. Either way, the claimed China's 2020 plan is rapidly approaching. If there were to be an invasion, it would likely occur when the weather calms down after typhoon season ends, late September or October. Now, this isn't at all to say that this is going to happen. Their 2020 plan could likely have been a goal set for its defense industry and military to reach. But regardless, the tensions still exist, and will almost certainly remain high for years to come.